Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the third-ranking House Republican, is facing major blowback over her vote to impeach former President Donald Trump. You will recall the Wyoming lawmaker was one of 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Mr. Trump for incitement of insurrection following the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Now, some of Cheney's GOP colleagues are calling on her to resign from her leadership position, while back home she's facing an early primary challenger for the state's lone House seat. But despite the backlash, Cheney insists that she is, quote, not going anywhere. So with more on this, we are joined now by a politics reporter for the Casper Star-Tribune, Nick Reynolds. Thanks for joining us, Nick. Wow, I mean, Liz Cheney is probably the last person who anyone would think her Republican credentials would be called into question, but suddenly that is what is happening. Cheney is one of 10 Republicans to vote against President Trump. How is her vote to impeach the president being perceived in her home state by her supporters?
I'd certainly say that depends on who you talk to. It's been a really mixed response here. While Trump's influence on GOP politics in the state's been really deniable, the Republican Party here is not homogenous. Most polls I've seen have shown a near even split in the number of Republicans loyal to the president, and vice versa here, you sort of see a similar divide. Cheney's a powerful Republican, and Wyoming is a Republican state for more reasons just than for its support of Trump. And the recent executive orders regarding fossil fuel drilling on federal land, I would argue has caused probably an even greater level of discomfort for Wyoming residents that are vote to impeach. And I think people recognize that you need someone in a position of power to fight back against that. And for a lot of people, Cheney is that person.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz spoke to crowds yesterday in Wyoming, and he wasn't shy about his feelings for Congresswoman Cheney. I want to play a bit of what he had to say.
I'll confess to you, this is my first time in Wyoming. I've been here for about an hour, and I feel like I already know the place a lot better than your misguided representative, Liz Cheney.
That is, I mean, it's just a weird thing to say. You've been there for an hour and you feel that you already know more than the Congresswoman who is in the district who was raised there. You know, it's like a rock band showing up in your town and saying that they love it, even though they don't even know where they are half the time. You know, how is that appearance in Wyoming translating into the infight for the Republican Party? Because I would think that, you know, somebody showing up even in my district from out of state to badmouth a fellow New Yorker, for example, to put it in the context here, would not be seen as something that people would find tantalizing. But I know that he did draw a crowd.
Yeah, that was a really interesting quotation. Honestly, when I was there, I sort of perceived it as him more saying that he identified with the same type of populism that Trump supporters really tend to identify with. And for the people there, that was, you know, really a universal feeling. I saw as many Trump hats as I did anything else there. It was a really enthusiastic crowd. But I know that wasn't felt universally. Last night, the former Speaker of the House in Wyoming tweeted about not having interlopers in the state's politics. And my social media feed has had as many people who are thrilled about what Matt Gaetz had to say in his vision for the state, as opposed to those who are really not happy to have an out-of-stater here. I think yesterday on Fox News, Senator Cynthia Lummis actually did say that she wasn't exactly a fan of people from out of state coming in and telling people what to do. And Wyoming voters in that sense are really independent, and they make their own decisions. I think that's something that Lummis recognized in that interview yesterday, and that's something that I think people need to keep in mind as we kind of try and make sense of what his visit here actually meant.
Yeah, well, it sort of smacks of political opportunism, and that being said, now Liz Cheney is set to face some challengers from within her own party for the 2022 election. Who are the main contenders?
At this point, obviously, the first person to step forward is State Senator Anthony Bouchard, who's been a fixture of Wyoming politics for a very long time. At the beginning of the decade, he was the founder of a no-compromise gun rights group called Wyoming Gun Owners that's now currently under control by the Dorr brothers, who run a national organization of similar like-minded groups. Bouchard's popularity has actually been increasing over the last couple of years. We anticipated his seat to be a pretty close race in the Republican primaries when he was facing against former staffer for Governor Mark Gordon, Aaron Johnson, and he ended up winning by close to double figures, which was a real surprise for us given how close many of his previous races have been. He then faced one of the best-funded Democratic state house candidates that we've ever had and won that race pretty handily, joining in the success of a number of different Republican seats here. Trump's popularity is huge in Wyoming, and that had an undeniable impact on this year's election results. We saw a number of races we expected to be close for Democrats in the Cheyenne area, for example, that went to Republicans for the sheer fact that people just turned out for Trump. We saw that throughout other areas of the state as well. Sweetwater County, which has been blue for decades at this point, went to Republicans for the first time in a really long time, which shows that there was a sign there. And talking to voters here, the main priority, again, was oil. It wasn't just a support for Trump. They were really concerned about the future for fossil fuels. So that's a real driving force in this. Whether we see other candidates emerge from the fold, that's still an open question. We've had a few people already file who are relative unknowns of Wyoming politics, a small-town mayor, just a regular person from Cheyenne. We've also heard suggestions that Brian Miller, who ran against Cynthia Lummis in the 2020 Republican primaries for the U.S. Senate, could also run. And Darren Smith, who ran against Liz Cheney back in 2016 and did, I'd say, about 15% of the vote. He has also suggested to Wyoming Public Radio he could run. And the Trumps, as we saw in that memo that was given to Politico yesterday, have already been polling other candidates. I think they used Casper Republican Representative Chuck Gray as a proxy in that poll.
So what about efforts from establishment Republicans to support Liz Cheney? Is that resonating? Because I'm just curious if in the course of your reporting you found that for most people, being a Republican means being loyal to Trump. It just strikes me that Liz Cheney, if that's how they feel, or if they feel that there are other things that go into making you a supporter of the Republican Party and its historical platforms and positions, which to me, Liz Cheney seems to imbibe that. But maybe in people in Wyoming see that it's all about Trump, and if you go against Trump, then you can't call yourself a Republican.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really complicated. We have had this infighting for a long time, and there are some clear factions in the Republican conference in the state house here. But politics in Wyoming works a lot differently than other areas in the state. Our most recent Speaker of the House was a high school football coach full time. Our current Speaker of the House is a veterinarian. Our Senate President is a newspaper publisher. Our politics really work by your relationships and how you work in small towns. And to some people, there's been a buy-in to the nationalization of Republican politics that really resembles what we've seen in states like Oregon and Texas and Arizona especially. But a lot of how things work here is still based on small town relationships. And Liz Cheney's done a lot in that aspect. She's brought Sonny Perdue out into the rangelands to deal with a problem that we've been having with managing prairie dogs. I remember covering that a while ago. She's been at Casper Chamber of Commerce luncheons with John Barrasso. That's really how politics works here. And ultimately, I think a lot of power in the state still comes from, I guess, prominent Republicans' relationships with their own communities. Most of our towns are about 5,000 to 10,000 people. And when you're in there, you really need personal relationships, and you need a lot of friends in a lot of different pockets of the state. And, that takes time. And if you deliver results, they're going to have your back. We've already seen that from endorsements from two of the state's biggest industry groups, the Wyoming Mining Association and the Wyoming Petroleum Association. Those organizations have huge memberships and very politically visible memberships. And for them to come out in support of Liz Cheney, that's a pretty huge statement.
All right, Nick Reynolds, really interesting insight and reporting from Casper, Wyoming. Thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.